When many in the West think of Russia, they immediately think of words like cold, destitute, Cold War, depressing, and so on, all with obvious negative connotations. People do so not knowing that this colossus has often commanded the respect of its millions of different inhabitants and ethnicities for centuries. The modern Russian state goes back as far as 500 years, with its direct predecessor, along with Ukraine's, being the medieval polity known as Kievan Rus, which was at the pinnacle of its power in the 11th century. So why is it that we associate Russia more with the bleak, mass-produced Soviet-style architecture that has proliferated throughout its industrial cities and towns? Of course, exceptions exist in the form of Moscow and St. Petersburg, among others, but still, why doesn't Russia have that many old buildings, especially compared to its neighbors?
Hi everyone, before we get started with the video, I just want to take the time to quickly sponsor myself with this book, Russia History, edited by Gregory Fries. What's so good about this book is that it is a collection of different academic essays written by different historians. So if you want to check this book out, please be sure to check the link in the description and the pinned comments. This is one of my favorite Russian history books, so please consider it if you want to learn more.
Firstly, we need to look at castles. Throughout much of Europe, the castle is seen as the primary symbol of the medieval world, with thousands being spread across the continent. In Germany alone, there are reportedly more than 25,000 of these structures in various conditions. For example, the German Castle Association created EBIDAT, which is a database for castles in countries like Germany, Hungary, Latvia, and the Czech Republic, among others. When I lived in the French Southwest, I couldn't even go a mile without seeing a castle. Don't mind the hyperbole. Even Wales is known as being a hub of some 600 castles, reportedly the highest proportion in Europe. But Russia? Yeah, there are not that many castles that I can think of. And before someone asks me why I'm specifically focusing on the medieval period, it's because Russian history as we know it really started here. There's very little documentation on the various Slavic tribes during antiquity, although one of the earliest mentions is an attack against Byzantium in 626 AD. As an example, according to a 1958 article written by archaeologist Brian Hope Taylor, the first Norman castles in England, known as mottes and baileys, were first constructed of wood. However, in places of permanent strategic importance, the wooden castles were replaced by stone buildings. This is mainly due to the feudal structure of their society, which filled their lands with private strongholds. According to famed economist Adam Smith, feudal law established a regular subordination, accompanied with a long train of services and duties, from the king down to the smallest proprietor. So in other words, kings legitimized local lords, who acted almost like satraps, who in turn oversaw their peasant serfs, who would then work the land. Such a parallel did not even exist in Kievan Rus, because there was no feudal system. The land of Kievan Rus was mainly dominated by the navigation routes of the Dnieper and the Volga, which in turn made it resemble that of the ancient Greek city-states more than it did medieval West European feudalism. The nomadic nature of the various steppe peoples in the area, like the Pechenegs, only served to reinforce this sense of normalcy. Yet in addition to this, Hoskins also argues that the heavily forested terrain of Kievan Rus also allowed inhabitants to avoid stone fortifications altogether. The dense trees would shield the Rus from future nomadic attacks, like that of the Pechenegs, so naturally there was no incentive to build such private strongholds. They were already kind of there for everyone. What's more, Kievan Rus had a much more confederal status than even the most decentralized feudal states, further discouraging the construction of such edifices. In Russia, feudalism, better known as serfdom, began to slowly come to fruition during the reign of Regent Boris Godunov in the late 16th century. However, it wasn't until Tsar Alexei's 1649 Ulozheny law code when real limitations on peasant movement came to be. Thereafter, the final nail in the coffin came with Tsar Peter the Great's amalgamation of the peasant and slave estates in 1723, pretty much rendering serfdom as a form of chattel slavery. To confirm this video's premise, I thought to myself, since feudalism took hold of most of Europe way before Russia, it would surely mean that European buildings are on average older than Russian buildings. And there seems to be validity to this argument. According to an early 2000s paper from the German Institute of Economic Research, almost 90% of the housing stock in Russia was built in the last 40 years. Data from the BRE, the EU, and the UN seems to point to the European Union having a much higher proportion of older buildings too. The BRE, for example, points to around 22% of the bloc's housing stock being built before 1946. Now, this does not exactly correlate to castles, as we cannot possibly know the exact nature of all the data, but it serves as an estimation of probability. If more castles were built within the boundaries of the now European Union, then it would most likely have led to the construction of more stone dwellings. And maybe it makes even more sense when one looks at the higher proportion of pre-1917 housing stock in St. Petersburg, which served as a Russian capital since 1703, when serfdom was at its zenith. Castles in the medieval sense no longer existed due to the advent of gunpowder, however the replacements were the palace or the estate, which served the same purpose, being command and control centers for the newly fixed serf population. The novel by Alexander Pushkin, titled Dubrovsky, highlights this social system quite well. It's no wonder that so many of Russia's fine historical buildings come from this period. Jeffrey Hosking further supports this by stating that, until the 18th century, then, nearly all Russian peasants lived in the forest, or at least close to an abundant source of timber. For that reason, most of their artifacts were wooden. Even towns were almost entirely constructed of wood until the 18th century. It really is absolutely baffling how medieval Kiev, a city as big as London at the time, could be mainly wooded. As an example, Janet Martin further writes about the famed Church of the Tith. The grand stone edifice, with its elegant interior, was unique among the city's growing number of wooden churches. Lastly, the obvious. Russia gets really cold during the winter, and according to Trading Economics, the temperature in Russia has averaged a boggling negative 5.52 degrees Celsius from 1815 up to 2015. To contrast, the same website showed that the temperature in France has averaged just 12.77 degrees Celsius from 1743 up to 2015. So to deal with this cold temperature, Russians would need something energy efficient like wood, which is known to be an incredible heat insulator, as opposed to stone. So to confirm this, I went online to find the rate of thermal conductivity in various materials and found that every single kind of stone had a higher rate of heat transfer than wood, meaning that heat would disperse faster. Nowadays, this difference doesn't really matter given insulation techniques such as double glazing. Hence, this confirms my personal experience when living in a very, very old stone house in France. In summer, it could be a lifesaver. So in short, why does Russia have so few old buildings? Honestly, it all boils down to Slavs appearing in history books later on, the later adoption of feudalism, the abundance of timber products, and also the heat insulation benefits of wood. Hello again, everybody. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, or whatever. I'd specifically like to thank my patrons listed here. If you'd like to become a patron, please check the pinned comment or the description, and be sure to check out our channel store. I'll see you guys next time.